It took extensive police action to end 3 weeks of blockaded streets around Parliament Hill. What began as an anti-pandemic measures protest spread nationwide across the country, causing blockades at vital Canada-U.S. border crossings like the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, Ontario. That bridge was almost completely shut down for 6 days. Roughly $300 million worth of goods cross that border every day. That's 1/4 of all goods shipped between Canada and the U.S. Yesterday, I sat down with U.S. Ambassador to Canada, David Cohen, to discuss the impact of these blockades on the Canada-U.S. relationship. Here's part 2 of our conversation. Let me turn and ask you about the relationship between our two countries. You've been here now, I asked you before the interview, 3 months. I thought it was even less.
Almost 3 months.
Almost
I'm coming up on my 3-month anniversary.
And it certainly has been, at least over the last 3 weeks, a very unique time here in Ottawa. Have you been surprised at all at how long the occupation of this downtown core was allowed to take place for?
So I find the entire Freedom Convoy trucker demonstration to be an interesting moment in Canadian history, but I don't think it's unique to Canada. So I want to start with that. I think this movement is typical of movements that we are seeing throughout the world. We've seen them in the United States, tend to be, and I call them movements because I think they are movements. They are relatively large groups of disaffected people. There is a populist element to them. They are people who don't like the government. They don't like large institutions. They often want to see radical change. They are often rooted in ultra-conservative political movements within their countries. And so to see that play itself out in such a visible way in Canada has certainly been interesting. But on behalf of the United States, I want to say that I do think that Canada at all levels of its government has behaved responsibly in managing these demonstrations and protests. I think the priority of Canada in opening up trade routes and in opening up ports of entry because of the importance of trade on both sides of the border. Remember, Canada and the United States have $2 billion a day in trade between our two countries. It is one of the largest trading relationships in the world. And to reopen those trade routes and those ports of entry so quickly and efficiently was essential, not only for restoring decorum and order and law and order to the country, but to preserve and to avoid the adverse impact on Canadians and Americans whose jobs were at jeopardy as a result of those demonstrations.
So I just want to ask you and follow up on that point, because some American politicians on the other side of the border in Michigan were not complaining, but worried about the length of time. For example, the Ambassador Bridge was closed. You don't share that concern? You thought it was opened quickly?
So I do think the bridge was opened quickly. I spoke with many of those Michigan elected officials.
Sure.
I come from a political background, so I prefer to call them elected officials and not politicians. So I spoke with many of those elected officials. I think they wanted to make sure that there was a real sense of urgency in Canada, a sense of urgency by the United States government, a sense of urgency for the United States ambassador to Canada about how important it was to open up these ports of entry and to get the flow of goods moving again as a result of the incredibly integrated supply chains between our two countries.
There was a specific Democrat in Michigan, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Debbie Dingell, who said, if asked if the duration of the blockade made her question the wisdom of relying on imports from Canada, she said, "I'm going to be very blunt, it does." Do you feel the same way? I'm gathering from your comments you don't.
So in fairness, Debbie Dingell is one of my best friends in the United States Congress. Is very close to her husband, who was, I think, the longest serving member of Congress at the time that he died, and she then ran for election in his seat. I have talked to Congresswoman Dingell several times. She's never said that to me. So I've seen the report as well, and I think you can look at the trucker convoy and you can look at the disruption to the supply chain in two different ways. One, you can say, well, because of this disruption, maybe we have to re-examine whether we should have these integrated supply chains and be reliant on any other country for any part of our supply chain. Or you can look at the same facts and say this integrated supply chain, this relationship between Canada and the United States is so powerful. It helps to produce so much economic activity. It helps to produce so many jobs on both sides of the border that we need to redouble our efforts to preserve the resiliency and the safety of the supply chain. That's where I come out.
So you don't think this, I just want to be unequivocal, you don't think what's happened over the past 3 weeks will or has affected the trading relationship between our two countries?
Well, I think it has not affected the trading relationship between our two countries, and I think it is doubtful that it will.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Ambassador.
Okay.
I appreciate your
Thank
time
you.
today.
Excellent. Thanks for the time.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.